This is A View from the Bunker. Now, here's Derek Gilbert.
We often talk about the giants in the Bible here on this program, the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown, the Nephilim, later called the Rephaim. What about their mothers? Welcome to A View from the Bunker. I'm Derek Gilbert. That'll be the subject of our conversation this week. But before we dive into this, if you're watching on YouTube, God bless you. Subscribe, share, and then if you would take a moment to download our free app. This is a way to guarantee that we never get cut off. If you get value out of these programs, make sure that we don't just suddenly disappear, because it could happen. It's happened to Skywatch TV. In fact, twice, 2 years ago, Skywatch TV got yanked off the air by YouTube for cyberbullying and harassment. And then just a few weeks ago, the women's program at Skywatch TV, Simply His, the sweetest, gentlest ladies you ever care to meet, apparently said something that was unacceptable, violated the terms of service or what have you. Anyway, guarantee that doesn't happen. Just get our app. It's for iOS, Android, Amazon, Kindle Fire. Not only does it give you all of our video content, all of our audio content. In fact, we're going back and uploading archives from 2005, 2006. But you can also join in the conversations. There's a little button at the very top that looks like a couple of talk balloons. And it is a place to share thoughts on these programs, but also to ask for prayer. We've got a prayer request section in there, and this keeps all of this self-contained and not out on a social media site where the algorithms are looking for words or concepts that they don't like. So you'll find it at vftb.net, or better yet, go to our main web hub, gilberthouse.org/app, gilberthouse.org/app. Our guest this week is a very gifted musician, but his life story goes way beyond his ability with a guitar. It is just remarkable. We've talked with him previously about his first book, Devil Take the Hindmost, which documents his life and how he survived for 12 years as a young boy with a demonically possessed mother. He's got a forthcoming book that'll be out in the fall called Nephilim Speak, Once Fallen, Forever Damned. And we welcome back to the program, Michael Gagliardi. Michael, it's good to see you again. In fact, it was just about 1 year ago, almost exactly. It was early July of last year that we spoke for the first time. And since then, we are now working out of our home studio. As you can see, this is our second spare bedroom. We've got every extra room in this house turned into workspace. And you've been busy as well, working on a follow-up book, or another book, rather, to follow up Devil Take the Hindmost, which will be out in the fall. The title, Nephilim Speak, Once Fallen, Forever Damned. What inspired this book?
Well, I think, the whole Nephilim thing is so interesting. And, being a human being, we can only speculate, and we only have so much information. So I started to go through the Bible and started to take some of the stories, like Goliath, for instance, and started to think, how were they reacting to this in real time? They're seeing this. They know, they're looking at Goliath. They know what Goliath is. They know that he is the union of fallen angel, and they know what these, who Og was, where these things come from. They know their origins. So I started to look at these things, and then my way of usually getting interested in a subject is I take the subject and then I start to back engineer it. I start to move backwards with it. Well, if that happened, then what happened before that? And what was going on before that? And started tracking back. And the book is really about, it's about some interesting things about the Nephilim that I don't think many people talk about. And I'll just give an example. For instance, I really believe that when David cuts the head off of Goliath, there's only one scripture in there that just gives us this tantalizing detail here sends our minds into speculation. But it's more than speculation. He says he takes the head back to Jerusalem.
Right.
Now, yes, he takes the head back to Jerusalem. And I'm thinking to myself, why this young kid would take the head back to Jerusalem. And then I'm beginning to, you never take things outside of the Bible. You always take the things that are within the Bible to make sense of the Bible. And when you only got a small snippet, I'm thinking to myself, well, why would he do that? And then we have this interesting part in, this story when Jesus is crucified. And they mention this place called Golgotha. So I start to research this name Golgotha. And I'm thinking to myself, because I've seen this in some of the language before in ancient days, it sounds like a compound word. It sounds like Goliath of Gath put together, which makes total sense. And I thought to myself, because you've probably been there. You've been to Golgotha. I've been there.
Right.
There's a little section, I can't remember what it's called, but there's a little section with a deck overlooking that parking lot. And I was standing there and I was looking at it and I thought to myself, this place doesn't look like a skull because that's natural. I thought to myself, this is how they did it in the ancient world to mark a place. They made it look like a skull because it says the place of the skull. So does it really mean the place that looks like a skull or the place of the skull?
Yes.
Yes. And then I'm thinking to myself, well, then if it was the place of a skull, what skull would be there? And then you start to piece these things together. He took the head to Jerusalem. Now, as I started to understand who really the Philistines were, as far as my understanding is, they are a tribe that came from somewhere in Crete or somewhere in that area. These Philistines end up showing up.
Right.
Yeah. So to me, they're coming from the like head of the snake area of where you've got this Greek culture going on with all of these fantastic creatures, and it makes sense to me that this clan, kind of gets redistributed into Canaan during the time where the Israelites aren't there. So they become, in all principality, the Philistines become the arch enemy of the Israelites. I mean, that's what we get from the Bible. So I get that. I start to understand that this begins to be more magnified, that to have Goliath's his head, this is marking a victory of their most difficult enemy. So David would take it back to Jerusalem for some sort of display. It never mentions what's displayed, but I think that it was buried underneath that mound, where the bus station is. Because this is called Golgotha, you have the compound word. I really think this is where it came from. And then you have this other scripture that you read back in Genesis, and it's mentioned when God declares war between the two seeds, and it says that he shall bruise your heel and he shall crush your head. So here you've got this visual, display of Christ on the cross, nailed through the heel, and the blood coming out and crushing the head of the enemy.
Yeah.
So you have this amazing symbology here, and that's why I believe the head is buried there. It was buried there for a purpose, to fulfill Scripture from the very beginning.
Our friend Messianic Rabbi Zev Porat has said the same thing. And in fact, wrote that in his most recent book. And I drew on that. And I put that in my book, The Second Coming of Saturn. So we're all thinking along the same lines here. What's really amazing was when you realize that when David cut the head off Goliath, he was still Saul's armor bearer. He had not yet gone through his time of running away from Saul when Saul was trying to kill him, being named king of the tribe of Judah and ruling at Hebron for 7 years. It was some years before he actually got to Jerusalem and set up the kingdom of Israel with the headquarters, a capital city at Jerusalem. So he carried, because the city of, at that time, was the city of the Jebusites.
That's right.
So it's not likely that he went and buried the head there at Jerusalem while the Jebusites still controlled it. I suppose that's possible, but the Bible doesn't say so. But if he took it with him when he set up his kingdom there, and again, this is on the, it's remarkable to think that that much time passed between the cutting off of the head and bringing it there. But I agree with you. I think you're absolutely right. I think Golgotha is Goliath's skull, and it was there on the very place where Jesus was later crucified.
Yeah. Yeah, and looking at, when you look at the rock that's there, when you look at the face of the Golgotha, it looks very crudely like it's been, we know it's ancient, but it looks very crudely. The rock formation is so that you can take pieces of rock out and kind of sculpt it in a way to mark that place. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really what it was about. I think that's, and the other thing why I think is that that is the true place, and that's what happened too, is because we know that Jesus wasn't crucified on the hill. He was crucified at street level. If he was on the hill, if you were coming into Jerusalem from the east side there, you wouldn't see him up on the hill. It would be quite a distance, and you don't get to see the gruesome brutality of the crucifixion. So it would be at street level. I think the difference now between the parking lot and what's there is maybe 30 feet.
Yeah.
I think it's about 30 feet.
From what I remember, right?
Yeah, and I think they said that they had found the bedrock, where it was carved into the bedrock, a square to actually put the cross into. And that begs one to think that, that when Jesus was being crucified, when I think it's Longinus that spears him in the side.
Longinus. That's the story anyway. It's not in scripture, but Longinus.
That's the story.
Yeah.
Right. It would make sense to think that, and then you have the earthquake that splits the ground open, and that the water would act as a vehicle to bring the blood down through the crevice. And it would have to land on what? It would have to land on the altar, because he's the sacrificial lamb to fulfill the Old Testament as the blood sacrifice for all the generation, wrapping it up and being the sacrificial lamb. That blood would have had to go on the altar. So that makes us kind of, conclude that possibly the ark was underneath there. And so was the altar, because I tell my wife this all the time. I tell her, there's no groups of Jews looking for the ark. You know what I mean?
There are a few here and there. There's a fellow named Harry Moskoff who's got a project out there where he believes he's located it, and he's trying to put together an expedition. I wanted to interview him, but he politely declined. So. All right.
Yeah.
But
my inclination is that they know where it is.
Well, yes. I see your point. Yeah. And that's exactly right. The rabbis say, no, there is no mystery. We know where it is. I tend to go with the prophet Jeremiah, who said it's not going to be seen anymore until we see it in the book of Revelation, when the throne room opens up and we see the ark up there. I don't think we're going to see it here on this earth anymore.
Yeah.
One of the things Sharon and I found really interesting is we researched the book Veneration, which deals with the worship of these spirits of the Nephilim, the Rephaim, by the neighbors of ancient Israel. That Goliath, and then later in 2 Samuel 21, no, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting. I think it's 2 Samuel 21, where you get to the last of the Philistine giants that David was doing battle with, and he almost gets killed by one of them, whose name is Ishbi Benab is how it looks, but it's actually Ishvi Ben Ov, which means Ishvi, son of the medium.
The Ov.
Yes, yeah. that Ov, OB is pronounced Ov, and that's how it's translated in the Old Testament. The Hebrew word means medium. This fella Ishvi ben Ov, and another one is the Sibbecai, the Hushathite, struck down Saph, who was one of the descendants of the giants. The Hebrew phrase translated "descendants of the giants" is actually Yeladei ha Rapha, and ha is the definite article the. Rapha is the singular form of Rephaim, so it actually means Yeladei. I'll get to that in a moment, but roughly descendant of the Rapha, or the giant, not the giants plural. But the word Yeladei does not mean literal blood descendant. What it means is somebody who's a member of a group into which they've been consecrated or initiated.
Yeah.
In other words, it's like they were a member of a cult that worshipped the Rapha, or the giant. So our thought is this, that these giants of the Philistines, and whether you look at Goliath as 4 cubits in a span, which is the oldest Hebrew text, the Septuagint, Josephus, that's 6'9", not 9'9", which is in our Bibles, 6 cubits in a span. But still, when David and his men were fighting him, the average Israelite was about 5'4". I looked that up.
Right.
So still a really big dude, and probably a member of some occult society that worshipped these Rephaim spirits, and so may well have been demonically possessed, besides being really, really big. Maybe something like Viking berserkers, 1,000 years ago, who were so dangerous on the battlefield that even after a few years, the Viking kings got together and said, let's make an agreement. We're not doing this anymore, because they kill everybody. I kill our guys, kill your guys, they kill everybody.
Berserk, where we get the word berserk from.
Exactly. So I think that's what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with a spiritual thing that David had to wipe out, a cult that worshiped these demonic spirits of the Nephilim. And the early church was in agreement, as were the apostles, that the demons, well, we don't see it explicit in the Bible, but it was the understanding of the early church, and we see it explicitly in the book of 1 Enoch, that demons were the spirits of the giants destroyed in the flood. So having encountered demonic spirits, as you point out in your book, Devil Take the Hindmost, being raised by a demonically possessed mother, you actually came a lot closer to these giants or their spirits than most of us would ever want to. And so that is something that, while, I can look at this as sort of an academic exercise, and I can look at the texts and say, okay, we can draw some conclusions about what these guys were doing. We can see that the Greeks, and the term that they used for their demigod heroes of ancient days, derives from this Semitic root word behind the word Rephaim. So the Greeks, Heracles and Perseus, they knew that these guys were Rephaim.
Right.
And this is not, this is academic stuff, but for me, that's an academic exercise. You lived with it. So what have you learned about these things during the course of your life?
Well, when I was going through it, there was, and I've told on different interviews before that my mother there was a period of time, maybe 8 years, where she was completely lost. She was either, fighting and arguing with herself and in different voices, or in trances, or singing loudly and just doing absolutely awkward, weird things. And there were 2 lucid moments, and she said the same thing during those 2 lucid moments. I remember, and both were the same incident. I was walking across the living room to go outside, and she said to me in her normal speaking voice, she said, "They run up the back of my spine and perch in my head." And then soon as she was done that, she went back to doing this, and the thing that I really realized, much later on, when I start to revisit all these memories, is that, their business was about hiding. They were hiding in her. the demon is a disembodied spirit. Well, that very term means you had to have a body to be disembodied, and it's like they crave, like you hear, the scripture about, when the demon gets cast out and it goes and it travels in arid places, and then it comes back and finds its house swept and brings 7 more in. When you really think about it, when you think about the personalities of those other 7, you're thinking, well, what do they have to gain by coming in? It's because they're wandering. They're wandering and they're seeking. And I find it interesting that it's arid places and it's that is some sort of aversion to water, and then the attraction to water in places like Caesarea Philippi. That's kind of confusing. But, they come back, and why do they do this? And, I've looked at and researched as many exorcisms as I could ever find, transcripts, audio, video, everything from the 13th century and on. And they always have the same language, and they spoke just like my mother. If you've ever heard the Anneliese Michel tapes, I think there's about 13 in all that are public. There's 67 tapes of her talking, in demonic, the demon speaking through her. My mother said the exact same things. Her parameter of language was the same. They speak in scatological terms. They blaspheme. They have extreme hatred. There's an explicit nature to their language, and that's the one thing that I really, after looking back, is that they're extremely hateful of us. They speak very hatefully and are very vile toward people, and that's how they. And in fact, over the last 2 months, I've had 3 encounters with demonically possessed people on the street, who were yelling at me in other languages, and I thought they were men, and when I turned around, they were women. 3 separate occasions. So, the thing that I took from this is they love to hide, and they love to. If someone has a mental disorder, the better, because it's kind of like camouflage. It's a form of camouflage.
Right. Likely to be diagnosed as some sort of mental illness.
Right. And that's what they want. They want the scapegoat, to be able to hide and to be able to be comfortable until their time. I mean, that's when they asked Jesus, "Oh, Son of Man," at the Gennesaret demon, they asked him, "Oh, why have you come to torment us before our time?" He said, "Could we go in the pigs?" So they're always requiring this embodiment. They're always searching for this, and they like to hide. When somebody becomes possessed, they don't go into that and then go screaming down the hall, trying to attract attention. That's not normally how it's done. Of course, their nature does provide sensationalism in some people, but a lot of the time they want to be kept quiet. They want to be quiet, and they want to, for lack of better words, live out their life, in the peace of a body that has invited them in and has accepted them in and is allowing them, So they love to hide, but here's the deal. Once they're confronted, then the cat's out of the bag, so to speak. Because that's when, they know we're in here, we're in here, and here we go. We have the war, with the fight, the battle begins, So those are the things that I've taken away as I look back, over all the times. And my mother was never in a state of normal. She was never normal. She was always screaming and yelling and having conversations, and this was going on daily, and it was driving me insane, But when I look back at that, I remember they warred against each other. She was constantly having battles back and forth. And when you listen to the Anneliese Michel tapes, they do the exact same thing. They vie for position. They vie for position. And this led me to believe, and this is, I'm going to answer this part of the question with a B part, is that because of the experience that I went through, I don't believe that their realm has the capacity to perfect stratagems. Their stratagems, because they are a realm that is in chaos. They try to overthrow each other. They try to gain their own worship, as you see with the many gods across time. You know, there's many gods, you know, vying for the people's worship, you know. And I think the main factor is that I really believe that because they've been cast down, the initial thing that was in them that connected them to God now does not exist. So they operate in chaos. Their nature is not the nature that God gave them in heaven. You know, once iniquity has been found in them, they seem to unravel. And this is what you see in demonic possession, is that, you know, they do not, like, for instance, they don't have the capability to love. They don't have that capability. They don't have the capability to compromise. All they want is destruction, death, and worship. You know, so that tells me that something that was in them prior, when they were in the court of heaven, you know, that they had a different nature. You know, Chuck Missler talks about, you know, the angels that fell, they disrobed. You know, and the word there for the habitation is oikaterion. You know, that they disrobed. And then in the book of Acts, and you know, Peter talks about how it's the oikaterion that we will take on when we become like them. You know, so they took this off to come and do their nasty deeds, and we're going to put that on, and that's how we become sons of God. You know, so it's just a very interesting thing going on.
The resurrection, as Jesus said, as he was being, and it's interesting because this was in the context of being challenged on demons. He was accused of casting out demons by his own power. No, wait. Nope, I'm confused. I'm conflating two stories. I want Matthew 12, or Matthew 22, not Matthew 12, where he was approached by Sadducees who don't believe that there's a resurrection. That's the story I want. Yeah. Where they give him this, you know, hypothetical. A woman married a guy and he died without children, and so the brother, doing his, you know, duty according to law, married her, and then he died, and, you know, so went through all seven brothers. And so whose wife will she be in the resurrection? Because they thought they were going to trip him up. And Jesus said, you don't know the law, you don't know the scriptures, because in the resurrection, they will neither marry nor give in marriage, for they will be like the angels in heaven. And that's, of course, used as a proof text to say that, well, Genesis 6 doesn't mean what it says because angels don't marry or give in marriage. No, angels in heaven don't do that. But the whole point of that scripture was this was about the resurrection. For those who attain to the resurrection will be like the angels in heaven. So once we are resurrected, as Paul writes about in 1 Corinthians 15, we will have these incorruptible bodies. We won't need to propagate the species, and so we will neither marry nor give in marriage. I hope I still get to be best friends with my wife, but you know, we're looking forward to something better with the incorruptible bodies. But according to First Enoch, these demonic spirits, these spirits of the giants destroyed in the flood, were condemned to wander the earth, tormenting humanity without incurring judgment until the final judgment. So in other words, because their dwelling is not in heaven, nor because they proceeded from women, they are allowed to torment us until that final judgment. But
no
this is not
plan.
Right. But this is. It's right. It's not really a blessing. It's like, okay, you can just do whatever you want to the humans until the end of time. But they are described in the book of First Enoch, the book of the Watchers, that first 36 chapters, as being thirsty but never able to eat and drink, and so they smite and cause disease and so forth. Is it possible that these thousands of years that they have been deprived of physicality, except for those times when they can inhabit a body, is what makes them so irrational, it seems, or at least that's how they seem to manifest, as in the case of your mother?
Well, that's a great point, because my mother basically ate herself to death.
Wow.
She was morbidly obese when she died, and she was only 46 years old.
Oh.
But when this this possession became more than just scratches and knocking and hearing voices, and that's because that's how it all started. But when she got really deep into it, she began to eat so, and I can't for the life of me think of the word, but she was not feminine about it. She was not a woman anymore. She was just a consumer, and she ate us out of house and home so bad that my dad had to put everything in the freezer, and we had to put the lock on it, and put a lock on it. We couldn't keep anything in the house. And of course, for me, with my dad living down in Toronto, that probably wasn't the greatest idea, because, we kind of starved as kids. So I went and stole food, from gardens in the summertime, and, out of kids' lunches, during winter time. But, you bring up a very valid point about that, is that when she died, the coroner said that it was atherosclerosis. So she had a, hardening of the arteries, a blockage in the arteries. I mean, she's only 46 years old, but I tell you, she ate copious, not only just copious amounts of food, but like an animal, like an animal. And there was no sense of femininity about her at all. She became almost neutral. I mean, she looked like a woman, but she was morbidly obese, and when you look at, and I always give this as a reference because the Annalise Michel case is so close to my mother's, the dialogue, she said the same things, the voices, the pitch of the voice, the tone of the voice. There's a lot of things like that. She ended up dying of starvation. She was only 68 pounds. So,
and she was only 24 years old when she passed, not even 24.
She was 24. Yeah. But so much about her case. In fact, when I first heard the tapes and I saw that and I read the transcripts, I went, my God, is this the same person that was in my mother? Because I heard the exact same things. I even recognized the pitch of the language. You know how we all have a dialect, kind of?
Mm-hmm.
It's called, there's a word for it, I forget, but like how somebody knows, in Germany, you're from this town and not from this town. It's not a dialect. It's
accent.
No, it's not an accent. It's even more acute than that. It's a, you only say that if you're from this town.
Okay.
My dad would say that because, a mile away, they speak different.
Colloquialism.
Yeah, something like that. And, and I could hear that. And I was like, geez, what are the odds? What are the odds of saying, like, for instance, they speak in scatological terms. They love to use, feces. They use that word constantly. They're calling everything, derogatory term. If they mention heaven, it's a blank hole. If they mention, people, they're an S this or an S that. It's always that. They use those scatological terms so profusely over and over and over and over and over and over and over, and you find that's a characteristic that threads through so many of the demonic cases that I've come across.
You mentioned something in the email that you sent me as we were setting up the time to discuss, and the possibility that in the pre-flood era, these rather corpulent statues that are usually referred to as fertility idols, fertility goddesses from the Neolithic period, the pre-pottery era of human history, that just speculating now, were these the human females who gave birth to the Nephilim? And were they then venerated as these fertility goddesses? But it just struck me as you were describing the tragic situation with your mother that all of these statues are really, I mean, corpulent, I think is a really good word, but they're just really an exaggerated female form.
Yeah. Well, I think that the mother goddess worship is, I think Satan took that because, from the beginning we knew, there was going to be war between his seed, her seed, and his seed. So, the mother is the nurturer, and she is to worship her, she is the antithesis of the Godhead. She is the antithesis of the Godhead, and that's what Antichrist means.
Mm-hmm.
And they mirror all of these things. You look at Arish Kegel, in the Sumer,
right? Goddess of the underworld, right?
Yeah, and she's the queen of the underworld.
Mm-hmm.
And the thinking of using a female, for worship, and I think all of the religions, or all of the ancient religions, all have that. They all have a female head, and she's the nurturer, and I think there's a reason that Satan weaponized this, because we can all relate to a mother, the nurturer, and they wrap it all up in that beautiful kind of mother, giving birth to. I mean, so somebody had to bear the first Nephilim.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I mean, if you're really looking at it on a realistic level, someone did it first. Someone gave birth to the very first one, which would have been the oldest, and that woman would have been venerated as a Mary kind of concept.
Mm.
And then we see that all through the years, and I don't find it any coincidence that the Catholic Church venerates Mary like they do, and not to bash on the Catholics, but there's something about that, that I think really draws people in. I think it's a deception that works.
And this gets back to the idea of competition in the fallen realm. There's a Sumerian myth called the descent of Inanna, who was Ishtar or Astarte of the Bible, and Inanna goes down to the great below, which is what Kigal actually means, and her sister Ereshkigal, with the idea that she's basically going to take her domain. She's already been venerated in Sumer, worshipped as the Queen of Heaven. She wants to, and she's taken away the Mez, which are the principles of civilization, from the god Enki, whose temple was called the House of the Abyss. So now she's down in the netherworld to take over her sister's right to rule the great below, the great underworld. And Ereshkigal is having none of it. She basically fixes Inanna with the stare of death and hangs her on a hook like rotting meat. Yeah. Interestingly, in that story, Inanna, her little assistants come out and they go to Uncle Enki and he tells them how to get her out. And she gets out on the third day, which is not coincidental. But this is the entity who was in the book of Jeremiah is worshipped as the Queen of Heaven. Yeah. And she's managed, I think, to con well-intentioned Roman Catholics to apply that title to Mary. Oh no, you're worshiping Mary, you're venerating Mary. I know they would say it's not worship. I was Roman Catholic for 10 years. So I have just a sliver of understanding of what the doctrine is about. That was a long time ago. It feels like another lifetime. But the idea is there, and I think it is a deception, a spiritual deception that's being woven through the world to draw attention away from Jesus Christ. But one of the other things that really strikes us here in recent years, when you look at women and the tendency of TikTok and social media influencers to influence young ladies into grotesquely enhancing certain features. Okay? I'm talking implants here and implants and on the gluteus to make themselves look like these ancient Neolithic figurines of the fertility goddesses. What's the connection between that, do you think, and this veneration, perhaps, of the mothers of the Nephilim?
Well, I really believe that, if you, like I said, I love to back engineer stuff. So, I think the grotesquely, the surgeries and things, part of that is what, God told us, not to, cut ourselves and do all these things. Like this is what they did in the ancients, right? Mm-hmm. They mutilated themselves. That's basically what's happening now. Whether you call it surgery or not, I think it's still mutilation. But, as you back engineer this, the conclusion about this goddess stuff, the old ancient, if we're speaking antediluvian, so we're speaking in that time, here's as far back as we could go and make a decent picture for ourselves. Noah escapes the flood. He gets out of the boat. They start to make a fire. They start living, as their sons have more children. You're doing a lot of sitting around a fire. You're doing a lot of talking. You're probably hearing the tales of the antediluvian world. Grandpa, what were we saved from? Mm-hmm. Because you've got 8 people that were eyewitnesses. We saw monsters. We saw all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. So now you've got people sitting around a fire, talking to grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and they become stimulated by this. I mean, you'd have to think there's nothing else to do, other than work, but they would tell these stories. And then as teenagers do, I don't think the teenagers in Noah's day were any different than the teenagers today. And they want to rebel. So they're thinking, wow, that ancient world sounds awesome.
Yeah.
It sounds crazy. I mean, our world's got nothing in it right now.
Right. The gods walked among us. Wow, pretty cool. Maybe we can bring them back. Let's build us a big tower.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that once the story gets separated enough from the original 8, now you have an unhealthy yearning for the past, because they told them about all these things. Well, how bad could it have been, Uncle Noah? Kind of deal. Well, God had to wipe out the whole earth. Well, did he really wipe out the whole earth? I mean, I wasn't there. It's just a story.
Have you been everywhere? You checked everywhere? Yeah.
Yes. And here we go with the telephone story as the generations get a little bit farther. And then what do we see? We see Göbekli Tepe, and then it's exactly what you would expect to see when we back engineer it, right? Well, if we go back to where Noah, it should have started from Noah's and branched out, and you should have started to see the beginnings of the veneration, the beginning of the enticement, the temptation. Mm-hmm. It was, basically Satan wanted those people to bring the world back into captivity again.
Yeah.
That's literally what happened. He probably said the exact same thing he said, or whoever said it, in the garden. You'll be like gods. You'll get ancient wisdom. Same old story.
What's really fascinating, and this is in my book, The Second Coming of Saturn, but when you trace back the practice of summoning Elohim, deities, gods, spirits from the netherworld for the purpose of necromancy, which is what the medium of Endor, the Ove of Endor, did when Saul went to visit. You remember Samuel's spirit came up from the earth. That practice, archaeologists have traced through a people called the Hurrians, the Horites in the Bible. And because they produce a very unique style of pottery, we can trace their movements going backwards in history. And their point of origin, as far as archaeologists can tell, is the Ararat Plain, somewhere in the middle of the 5th millennium BC. The Ararat Plain, you mean below the mountains of Ararat where the ark came to rest? Yes, below the mountains of Ararat where the ark came to rest. We can trace this practice of necromancy, of trying to summon spirits from the netherworld to the people who came down from the mountain off the ark. And it's astonishing. The archaeology supports the biblical story. Skeptics will say, yeah, but well, okay. Believe what you choose. Jesus validated all of the stuff in the Old Testament with his testimony, and the fact that he literally did rise from the dead on the third day was witnessed by hundreds of people. Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 pointing out hundreds of people saw him, most of whom were still alive 20 years later. So, hey, if you don't believe me, Church at Corinth, send somebody to Jerusalem and ask around. So, yes, the weird stuff in the Bible, it's real. And as Mike Heiser used to say, if it's in the Bible and it's weird, it's probably important. So that's why we pay attention to it. So what are you going to, just not to take up your whole evening here, one final question. I'm looking forward to the book in the fall, Nephilim Speak, Once Fallen, Forever Damned. What are you hoping to communicate to readers with that book?
Well, unfortunately, still these kind of subjects are kind of avant-garde for churches still.
Yeah.
I kind of purposely made the book a little, I didn't go too scholarly with it, made it very easy to read. It's basically a fairly thin book. It's not like a great big huge book, because I myself get overwhelmed by, large amounts of material. And, I think taking little things in pieces and helping people digest it in, just layman's terms. And I think that's really, I speak at my church sometimes, we have small groups, and we talk about this stuff, and everybody's like, oh, how come nobody talks about this? I get the same reaction every time. Why isn't anybody talking about this? Why is it? Well, I think most of our pastors are still kind of, and I'll use the term loosely, but kind of old school. Still, they're teaching salvation and application, and that's all great. But if you really believe we're living in the end time, then you need to be more up to date with what's going on archaeologically, linguistic wise. What we're discovering, because we're discovering things all the time. This is the era of discovery, and we're learning so much now about the ancient world that, of course, when Jesus debriefed his disciples and told them, well, it'll be like the days of Noah. Boy, that's got to be the number one thing on your mind, is to go, well, what were the days of Noah? And that requires, I still hear people say, well, the days of Noah, people were just, bad. And I'm not like, then he would have came already.
Yeah.
It was something far more sinister than that, So that's really what I want people to take away, is to take a piece of. So I think I go through about 5 things. One we included was the Golgotha thing, and it just brings a credential to your Bible that most people aren't going to hear about in church. And I've come, of my wise old age of 56 now, that simple is better, and people seem to be able to digest that. I took my whole level of playing, because I'm a musician. I had these intricate, 5 different time signatures and all this crazy wild chords that, with flat 5th, 7th. And, people thought it was great, but nobody wanted to hear it. So when I put it down to, let me give you some simple rhythms, and then just go a little crazy for a little while and give you a little off the charts kind of 12-note thing, I found people could really, really digest and chew on that. So that's really what I'm looking for, is to help people who are interested, because I came across this material by accident. My first introduction was hearing a Chuck Missler I had nothing to do on that day, and Chuck Misler popped up, and I'm like, yeah, whatever, I'll listen to it. And he got into this thing about Genesis 6, and I went, no way,
Mm-hmm.
no way, because I've always been a student of the Bible in its original language, because our English does not do it justice.
Mm.
So once I heard that, I was like, wow, I have got to study this, and because I'm inquisitive, inquiring minds want to know.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and it helps
So-
make sense of what you've been through as well, and that is something that is lacking in a lot of Christian, in the understanding of a lot of Christians of what's going on in this world. God is not a cosmic Pez dispenser handing out candies to us every time we, do the right thing or say the right prayer. It's there is a spiritual war, supernatural war that is going on around us. That's been going on since the very beginning, and this is the enemy who wants to destroy us and everything that we love. So trying to understand the enemy, and I get it. There's some people who get a little freaked out by this. It's like, well, we should just focus on Jesus. Well, but Jesus paid a lot of attention to this too. Notice where he declared his divinity at the base of Mount Hermon. Notice where he was transfigured into a being of light on the summit of Mount Hermon. And the connection with the Mount of Olives and Golgotha, all of these things fit together. It's not fringe. It's really at the heart of this supernatural war. And, Michael, the upbringing that you've had and the insight that's given you, that's one of the battlefronts, one of the battlegrounds in this long supernatural war. We should point out to people, you mentioned you're a musician. You are the Luxury Industry Award-winning guitarist for 2023. Where do people follow your music?
I'm on Spotify, iHeartRadio, all of that stuff, wherever. If you put my name in and put Michael Anthony Gagliardi, musician or guitar player, you'll find all that. I've got YouTube stations that just have my albums on it, and things like that. And it's what I do for a living.
I'll put links in the show notes. I'll put a link to your Facebook page as well, and in the notes below, so that people can check that out as well. And we will definitely let people know when the forthcoming book, Nephilim Speak Once Fallen, Forever Damned, comes out in the fall. Thank you again for your time this evening, and we will talk again.
Thank you, Derek. Appreciate it.
You'll find Michael's website in the show notes below this program, whether you're watching or listening, so do check that out. I'll also put a link to Michael's first book, Devil Take the Hindmost, and there is a part 2 to that, by the way, if you're interested in learning more about the story. I mean, it's horrific thinking about how a young child literally having to barricade himself in the room at night to protect himself from his own mother. I mean, that's just, it is unimaginable. Well, coming up, we may have reached peak wokeness. I mean, language has been hijacked by progressives to advance a certain agenda, and we may have found the most repulsive example of the hijacking of language yet. Bless their pointy little heads. Straight ahead as A View from the Bunker continues.
Guess what month it is, and that's why maybe we're wearing red, white, and blue.
It's July.
It's July, which means not only that, the United States celebrates Independence Day, but also anniversary of something big.
Yes, the 1947 Roswell crash, which occurred over 4th of July weekend.
It did. In fact, in 2017, you and I and Josh Peck all went to Roswell to see exactly what happened and get some expert interviews. And then you wrote a book.
Yes, Josh and I wrote the book, The Day the Earth Stands Still, about the phenomenon, because for many people, the UFO phenomenon is not about figuring out how we can travel to the stars. It is really a religion, answering the big questions of life. Why are we here? Exactly. Where did we come from? What happens when we die?
And it is back in the news. So that is the main reason we've decided to bring back a special from last summer. If you get this book, and you will get these two practically free.
Yes.
Because the whole package, you're going to save $30.
Yes.
It's only $35 for all three. You get the book, The two Sci Friday crazy.
Best of deals is 14 hours of video on the between the two Best of Sci Friday. And we do address the UFO phenomenon on some of these episodes. $35 plus shipping and handling, available now only at our store online, gilberthouse.org/store. Talking the Walk every Sunday night from the beautiful Missouri Ozarks. This is A View from the Bunker. You'll find us online at vftb.net. Our global hub, gilberthouse.org, gilberthouse.org. That's where you'll find everything that we do, our weekly Bible study. That is the Gilbert House Fellowship, our weekly broadcast program, another episode coming out tomorrow of Unraveling Revelation, and our podcast, which is... we're going to come up on 20 years. We're one of the first podcasts out there on the internet, PID Radio. All of that in one handy little package on our mobile app. You'll find us on social media at View from Bunker or at Derek Gilbert, on the new Threads social media site at Derek Gilbert, and Truth Social Gab Me We Get Her at Derek P. Gilbert. And again, if you would take a moment and download our free mobile app, gilberthouse.org/app. This is one of those stories that when you see it, it almost makes you wonder whether it is the Babylon Bee, because it is so ridiculous. You have to wonder, question, is this story really legit? And apparently it is. A charity in the United Kingdom is drawing some pushback, because they've recommended that the female reproductive organ, the vagina, be referred to, so as not to offend trans men, that is, women who identify as men, as the bonus hole. I am not kidding. The bonus hole. Needless to say, female rights campaigners, feminists, are quite upset about this, calling it misogynistic and utterly dehumanizing. This is the recommendation for medical professionals at the website of the charitable organization Joe's Cervical Cancer Trust. It's on a page for medical professionals who are dealing with patients who have the disease. And again, if you've got a cervix, you are by definition a woman. But so as not to offend those who want to be called men, even though they have cervixes and vaginas, they recommend medical professionals use the term bonus hole. This is dehumanizing, and frankly, it is offensive. It is it is really, really repulsive. Now, the trust is pushing back and saying, well, we're not suggesting that it be used of all women, just those women who apparently are dealing with gender dysphoria, so as not to offend them. But look, I'm sorry, biology is what it is. And calling it by a made-up name doesn't change the fact that it is a vagina. And if you've got one, again, you are a woman. This terminology to avoid offending people, because apparently that is job one of medical professionals today, is avoiding offending those who are inflicting their gender dysphoria on the rest of us, and demanding that the rest of us participate in this illusion. And I want to be gentle here, because those who are in this lifestyle are at far greater risk of self-harm than the rest of the population. I mean, trans activists will admit that their own statistics show that 42% of the people in this lifestyle will at some point attempt suicide. And that is far, far higher than the rate of suicide or attempted suicide among the general population. And it's not because they're not receiving enough affirmation from the rest of us. It's because this is a symptom of an underlying comorbidity. So this suggestion from this charitable organization in the UK that the term bonus hole or front hole be used to replace a term that look, I'm sorry, biology is what it is. You can't change that. And to you, we say, bless your pointy little heads. Yes, one can only hope that this kind of thing, and again, I'm trying to be gentle here, will show those who are really not engaged one way or the other that this has just gone too far. But it's part of a broader move to deconstruct what God created and called good. Have you not read from the beginning? Created he them male and female. Well, coming up, we've got a few events. We are just, as you're watching this, returning or have returned. We would have returned this afternoon as you're watching this from the wonderful Go Therefore conference in Brookville, Ohio. So our thanks to Dr. Mike Spalding and Kathy Spalding for putting it together, Pastor Neil Peterson for hosting this, and his church, the Harvest Revival Center there in Brookville, Ohio. And I am just hoping that we had some time during the event that I was able to grab some interviews there, because the lineup at this conference was absolutely spectacular. The rest of this summer was going to be devoted to editing some video, setting up our barn project, which I haven't talked about often enough here. I'll touch on that in just a moment. But we will be going to the Pitchfork and Hoe gathering, or at least I will, in late October. So the last weekend in October, Friday and Saturday, October 27th and 28th, Valley City, North Dakota. This is just west of Fargo. Looking forward to returning to my mother's home state, so that should be a lot of fun. Details on that forthcoming. Details on our Israel tour for 2024 with our special guest, Timothy Alberino. We pray that you will consider joining us. This will be life-changing. We go places other Israel tours don't. And, of course, we see all the places that you want to see. The Temple Mount, the Jordan River, the Sea of Galilee, Old City, Jerusalem, Nazareth, and so on. But we will also go to Gilgal, Rephaim, and some other megalithic sites and explain why those are relevant to the Bible. Details online at gilbertsinisrael.com. And the Build Barn Better project is now gaining momentum. By the time you watch this, the new floor will be down. The epoxy floor, 15-year warranty, that will be down, and our contractor working on the electric, the walls, making sure that the exterior walls, which have a few holes in it, original owner had a propane heater out there that he removed. So we've got a couple of things we need to replace. Windows that need to be put in to replace the storm windows that pass for windows in the barn as of now. All of that is underway as you're watching this, which means during the month of August, we will be getting the insulation installed and the HVAC system. Then we're going to start hitting yard sales and flea markets to find material, to find furniture that we can use to set up the sets that we will use for Unraveling Revelation. This podcast, we basically, very soon, you will no longer be seeing one of our guest bedrooms in the background behind me on this program. So if you are so led, we've got the funds to make this possible, and it is all through your generosity. We truly appreciate that, and we look forward to bringing you programming from the barn sooner rather than later. Hopefully by September, we'll be producing programming out there and able then to, when my sister comes to visit, she can actually sleep in a bedroom instead of on the couch out in the living room out there. And again, it is only through your generosity that that has become possible. So thank you for that. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule this week to watch or listen to this program, wherever that might be. Again, check links in the show notes, and please, if you get a spare moment, to leave a review wherever you're consuming this podcast: Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Spreaker, or wherever fine podcasts are sold. We would certainly appreciate that. Our announcer is DC Good, and A View from the Bunker is a production of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. We wrestle not against flesh and blood. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is A View from the Bunker.